I really enjoyed my conversation with my guest, Ashton Applewhite, who is a speaker, author, and activist. I discovered her work through her TED Talk called Let's End Ageism. If you haven't had a chance to see it, or this is your first time hearing about it, do yourself a favor and watch that talk as well. I ordered her book immediately afterwards, and it's called This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism. And I read that book while I was on vacation. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure how I was lucky enough to book her as a guest for Level Up, but Ashton was super generous with her time, her insights, and very encouraging as well, as you'll hear through this episode. I got to be honest, I approached this episode with a general satisfaction that I'm not, in fact, ageist, and that I am more conscientious than most, and when it comes to fighting stereotypes in ageism. But after reading her book fully, and especially after having this conversation with her, gotta say, I am taking a harder look at that assumption. She helped me open my mind to the possibility that we, the professionals in senior living and aging services, that we may actually be, in part, perpetuating ageism. I think that's true. I hope that you will enjoy this episode and that it'll help you to do some self-reflecting as it did for me. Ready? Let's level up. I'm so delighted to be speaking with you, Ashton. Thanks so much for joining Level Up Leadership Podcast today.
My pleasure, James.
This is a really interesting opportunity for me. I typically, if I've read a book by somebody I'm talking to, I've known them first, and then they write a book and then they send it, and I'm like, oh, great, this was a great book. This is, I think, my first experience going the other way, where I read your book prior to speaking with you, and it turns out I listened to your TED Talk about ageism long ago, and then it was reintroduced to me around the time I picked up your book. So I'm really excited to be able to speak to you today.
I've been haunting you without
You've been
your
haunting
knowledge.
me. You've been haunting me without my permission, and now you have full permission to haunt me.
Well, thank you. One of my favorite compliments about the book is that it sounds like me. the writing itself, not just the audio version. So I hope you can tell us at the end whether or not that's the case.
Yes, absolutely. And I know this episode's not going to be aired on video, although maybe it should be, but I have it right here. Here's the book. I'm holding it up to the camera. So if you're just listening on the audio podcast, the book is This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism by author, activist Ashton Applewhite. Did I pronounce all of that correctly?
You did.
All right.
Oh, it's a lot of A's.
It's a lot of A's. Yeah. If this were Wheel of Fortune, I would buy the vowel A and get most of this. I was really, really delighted to read this book. I actually read it on vacation. I think you saw that on an Instagram post. So, I had toes in the sand. I was, in on a beach in Hawaii, and next to me on either side were kind of romance novels and murder mysteries. And then This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism.
Help you pick up chicks.
It totally did, which
I knew it.
Was my wife of 14 years. So she said, I will stay with you.
Because you are reading Ashton's book.
Yes. I took several books with me to Hawaii, and this was one of them. And I got to tell you, Ashton, I really, really enjoyed it. This won't be an hour-long book review per se, but so much of what I want to ask you about is really rooted in, and a lot of it's answered in the book, by the way. So, but the one kind of, I'll use your word haunting word to kind of describe what I want to say here. The one haunting kind of thing that came up over and over for me, I started reading the book with the premise of the question, am I ageist? And as I read the book and went through it, I changed that question to, how ageist am I? Any reactions to that?
Well, I commend your honesty. Really, really, really. And I hope you don't think I'm being patronizing at all. That is the hardest, most uncomfortable, most necessary step. So you started out already with a willingness to examine the premise
Yeah.
that you were biased. Of course, we are all biased. It's never fun to admit it, but we can't, ageism is so unexamined relative to other forms of prejudice, and we can't address bias unless we acknowledge its existence, right?
Correct.
So the very first step, it is my favorite comment to hear about my book because it tells me someone is open-minded enough to consider our own role in perpetuating bias. And of course, we are all biased, no judgment. You never are completely free of it because we live in a culture that bombards us with messages about aging, almost all negative from childhood on. And unless we stop to examine it, they become part of our identity.
I think it's one of the journeys of reading this book, which I think is a microcosm of reading any book that's impactful in any way, is that you're not learning just about topics or superficially kind of addressing them. You're examining yourself, and it is one of the kind of central questions of my career in senior living. I've spent 14 years and counting, hopefully the rest of my career, which hopefully will be the rest of my life, not some predetermined retirement age, as you pointed out in your book. But the journey, 14 years here in senior living, there's been something that's been kind of nagging at me, and I'm really curious about your thoughts on it, which at the beginning of my journey in senior living, I felt very kind of called to help older people, and it that in and of itself doesn't sound ageist, but as I've kind of gone further into the industry, I kept asking myself, is senior living unknowingly, maybe unwittingly, perpetuating ageism? And I think there's a lot of just even the way that people in our industry talk about their passion in the industry. They say, oh, I love taking care of people who can't take care of themselves, or I love grandmas and grandpas, or just even the description of how we talk about our affinity with the older population. Especially after reading your book, Ashton, I keep thinking, is a lot of our call to action, call to purpose in our industry specifically based in ageist beliefs about seniors not being able to do for themselves. And so we have to take on that hero mantle to help, these people. I'm sure that that's not a conscious thought for the vast majority of people in my industry, but in the spirit of self-examination, I wanted to pose that kind of, maybe not question, but thought to you. Have you found, or do you think it's possible that people who are working on behalf of olders, as you called it in your book, are maybe perpetuating ageism too?
You just asked me about 100 questions
Yeah.
indirectly, but I
Yes.
commend you on asking me something I've never been asked and compelling me to think hard too, which is very welcome. I remember when I started out learning about all this stuff and figured out that ageism was the thing I wanted to focus on. And I was incredibly naive.
Mm-hmm.
And in fairness, I had no credentials and no professional affiliation. So who would want to listen to me? But I was like, AARP and people in, the aging services, they're going to be so happy to hear what I have to say because I have figured out the universal problem that afflicts us all and stands between all of us, and more voice and more, visibility and getting more money to improve what we do, etc. Not so much. And because people, sort of counterintuitively, older people can be the most ageist of all because we have had a lifetime of internalizing those messages, even though it's bad for us. So there's no logic to any form of prejudice, but ageism is prejudice against our own future older selves. So
Absolutely.
It's even more nutty. An awful lot of people in aging services make their living doing the incredibly important work of caring for and helping the most debilitated and oldest members of our communities. And that is really valuable. It's undervalued in so many economically and socially. So more power to you. I salute you. I don't think I could do it. However, that means that your identity, your funding model, your training is invested in this sort of deficit model of aging. Correct. As increasing disability, as needing more help. And that is deeply ageist and ableist. So there's that. You've already embarked on that aspect of looking at yourself. I also think it's a hard job for any of us to become, well, I use a phrase I borrowed from a geriatrician named Joanne Lynn, becoming an old person in training.
Ah, yes.
Which is just to form an imaginative link with your future older self, so you don't get caught up on that hamster wheel of it's never going to happen to me. If you are caring for people who represent an end of life that none of us would choose, let's be honest about that. Let's always be honest about the scary stuff. Yeah. Otherwise, we're just papering it over and increasing stigma, actually increasing fear and stigma. Yeah. Reconciling that view of old age, which is part of the picture, with what you hope lies ahead for yourself, I think that's a really, really tough job as a human being. Yeah. So no judgment on any of this, but I do think it's really important for people in your industry to think about, your views towards age and aging and the people you help. It's reminding me, I wish I had a better vocabulary for it, but if you, in social justice circles, if you pick any marginalized community, Indigenous people, African Americans who would like to see more anti-racist work done. No one wants to be the object of pity. Sure. No one wants to have someone on high, the white savior complex. Oh, I know what group, as a privileged white person, I know what group X with less power wants. I will help them. No, right? You need to embed, if you are allowed to do so, observe and see what those communities, you want to offer whatever they ask for, not assistance on your terms, right? So when you are helping sad, sick, old people, you are creating a distance from them that is, we're all human beings, and it is infantilizing, often patronizing, and usually unwelcome. A dead giveaway, if you are, people ask me, when does old begin? Of course, old never begins at a certain point. You just wake up a day older every day, whether you're 17 or 77. But if you have more road behind you than ahead, newsflash, you are not young anymore. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard really esteemed people in aging services talk about older people as them. That's right. Not us. Yeah. Right. And I think it's harder when you're younger. I think it's hard to imagine being old. Yeah. And I don't think that's ageism. I think that's human. As a kid, could you imagine that you would rather sit in a chair than run around? Yeah. It just seemed inconceivable. But, there is much work to be done in aging services, breaking down that model of people with power or expertise helping people who are lesser in some way and other than ourselves in some way. Yeah. It's, gosh, there's so much to unpack there. We could really spend our entire episode just on the back and forth we've already exchanged. I feel like I'm going to just inadvertently plug your book about 50 times because you address this. You address all of these things actually within the book. Several of these things, old person in training, ageism being a prejudice against our future selves. It's true. By the way, that is not an idea that is original to me. Yeah. I think it first appeared in print in a book by an age scholar named Todd Nelson. Yeah. It's an idea that anyone who thinks about aging and about prejudice arrives at sooner or later, because all prejudice requires an othering. It's, is the sociological term, whether that person or group is a different color, different sports team, you name it, humans will other on the slightest pretext, I'm afraid. But in age, that other is our own future older selves.
Yeah. I love, by the way, just as an aside, I love that you do that. In the limited exposure I've had to your work so far, Ashton, you're very careful to call out where an idea is not originating from you, but you're kind of standing on someone's shoulders, which I think is something that all of us in any creative space, whenever we have the ability to do that, we should. And I see that you make a very concerted effort at that. So kudos. It's something I need to do a better job of myself.
Thanks. I've learned some of it the hard way. I mean, when ideas are your currency, you'd like to be attributed. On the other hand, let me say, I would rather anyone listening to this beg, borrow, steal, appropriate anything I have said or done. If you can credit me, great. If it's not possible for whatever reason, the reason I put these ideas out there is so they will go out in the world. So go forth with them. You have my blessing.
Oh, you're more of a hero in my eyes because of exactly what you said. I believe that too. I think in this type of work, assigning credit actually deteriorates the work and
just slows things down.
It does.
And karmically, the odds are, getting my ideas out there, more people are likely to hear about me and hire me. If they don't, I'll never know. But it's not a zero-sum proposition. It's not less for me if you take my ideas out.
Yeah, it's something that as a new business owner, trying to advance, in the field of dementia specifically, by kind of rooting in education and not a care model. It's more of a education model. The deficit is knowledge, not care, and that's what we're trying to do at Bella Groves.
Good for you.
And
it's probably harder to monetize.
It's a lot harder to monetize, but the things that we've tried to think about in terms of this, gosh, there's so many ways I could take this conversation, but
that's always the curse.
It is.
I mean, it's so interesting. If we're a generalist like me that could never figure out what to be when she grew up or what to focus on, it's just like aging is this universal, fascinating, lifelong experience, and it connects to everything. So every conversation is like getting up in a big tree with a million branches. You can take it in any direction. A blessing and a curse. Not a good thing when you're trying to organize a book, let me tell you.
I'll bet, and you did a pretty great job of that, by the way. I looked at your chapters and I thought, wow, how did you,
I suffered. Every pixel is drenched in blood and sweat.
Yeah. Well, I think some of it got on my book. I don't know if that was yours, Ashton. But I want to return.
It was your sweat since you read it at the beach. There better be a little suntan oil on the pages.
That's true. There's probably a little bit of me in there. But literally, but also just, metaphorically, there's just so much in there that it caused me to examine about myself. Not am I ageist, but how ageist am I? And how can I change that in my actions moving forward? One of the things that you said about this othering, which we're taught how to other, aren't we? It's not maybe innate in us, but as children, we're taught.
It's not in very little children, but attitudes towards aging start to form in early childhood around the same time as attitudes towards gender and race. So we learn them from the grown-ups around us.
Yeah, it's something that, as uncomfortable as it is, I try to call out just in my own personal social circles. Whenever I see, kids dress up as grandma or grandpa day, and it always is bad stereotypes.
It's always a stereotype of disability.
Correct.
Let me just point out that the minute you asked yourself that question of how even am I ageist, not to mention the icing on top, how ageist am I in what ways, you have already turned the corner. You are already thinking differently and therefore presenting yourself differently, speaking differently. So you are already embarked on this process of culture change. And I will submit to your listeners that you are already past the worst part, which is to go, oh crap, I'm complicit in this in ways that haven't even occurred to me. Because the minute you see it in yourself, then you start to see it in the culture around you, as you just described in that horrible, dress like 100-year-old day. And then then you realize, oh, it's not my personal deficiency. It's not that I'm a bad person or whatever. It's that it is embedded in these social and economic systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we can come together and do something around it,
Yeah.
like turning Dress Like a 100-Year-Old Day into an opportunity to raise awareness of ageism. And I should say, my book is not free, but I have been thinking out loud about all this in blog form on my website, which is thischairrocks.com/blog. And if you Google 100-year-old, you will see a campaign that I cooked up with people at Pioneer and Rats. They're going to be mad. Eden Alternative, two other, pioneers in your field, for turning that holiday into awareness of ageism. It gets into another intersection that I don't know if you have the real estate to go into right now, but the intersection between ageism and ableism, which is prejudice against people with disabilities. And it's really complicated because the fact is, although some people use walkers, from the minute they can walk in infancy, the one universal fact of aging is that some part of your body is going to fall apart.
Yeah.
So you are going to see more canes, more wheelchairs, more mobility issues in older people. So it is a shared characteristic, and we don't want to deny that or brush it under the rug. I got a heartrending email this morning from some guy in Australia who works in senior services saying that residents at one of the places that he's affiliated with in some way are circulating a petition to vet people who want to join the committee for quote unquote younger residents, by which they mean more active, which is just like such a bad idea that we can go into for 100 reasons if you want. But an awful lot of our fear about aging is actually fear about how our minds and bodies might change. And that is actually ableism, not ageism. And we have so much to learn from younger people with disabilities about adapting to disability, about identifying as a disabled person rather than I am who I am despite being blind or being mobility impaired, which is, I think, a mindset that is changing now to I am who I am, in part because I have this thing. It's integral to my identity and my experience, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's part of who I am.
Yeah,
I'm proud of it.
What an important distinction and parallel there. And by the way, the term ableism is certainly a less familiar concept, if not just term by itself. But I think that's a really profound parallel that you're making there about how we can learn to deal with ageism by looking at other ways that we're doing that in society.
Absolutely. I mean, so much, to pick the corporate sphere, not which interests me least of all. But, think of what, the strides that corporations have made in addressing gender equity and racial equity.
Yeah.
Age is different from each of those things. Race is its own particularly thorny and awful problem because of the uniquely ugly way racism is embedded in American history.
Yeah.
But this process of waking up to our own bias and learning to confront it, which is not easy, unconscious bias, we don't know it's there, and the knowledge is unwelcome for a lot of us. The same processes that we can use to address our internalized misogyny or racism or homophobia can be applied, broadly speaking, to educating ourselves about our internalized ageism and ableism as well. So the ground is plowed. It's one of the reasons I'm optimistic about what I do, is sort of to hitch age and ageism to this sled, along with ability, along with race and gender, I think is something progressive people everywhere are learning how to do and beginning to understand, viscerally, not just as some virtue signaling thing, why it's important and necessary.
I think that's such an important thing also for us to acknowledge and recognize, is this whole concept of virtue signaling. I think getting back to the root question which started us on this tangent is, are people who are working on behalf of older people sometimes perpetuating ageism? And I think a kind of a parallel that you made, or will try to make now, is when you talked about advancing the work for African Americans and racism, and then you've got the the white savior complex. The comparable to that is probably the younger professional savior complex of people in our industry, no matter what age you are, never really talk about our prospective resident or family from the point of us. It's they. No matter what age you are, you could be an 85-year-old CEO, and you're going to talk about residents and seniors as they, not us. And I did note that it's markedly present in the way that you talk about, and I think the term you use is olders, not
I do.
seniors. And I get that too, that some of these other words already have so much connotation of negative stereotypes that I see the need
Negative, or
for
even, I mean, you could argue that senior or elder, which a lot of progressive
elder, right?
people in senior living use, which is a beautiful word. It's, African American
is.
communities often use it, indigenous communities. Those are not my communities, so it's
Mhm.
alien to me. And what I
Mhm.
like about olders and youngers as nouns is that they're value neutral. I don't think old people have more value than young people.
Yeah.
I don't think age confers wisdom. There's lots of older people who don't seem to have learned much, and there are wise children,
Yeah.
right? So I like olders and youngers because they're value neutral. But
Mhm.
this us them thing, I mean, I think it's hard. I'm about to turn 70. By
Mhm.
no measure am I young.
Yeah.
Arguably, I have no idea how old you are, but you have way more road ahead of you than I do. And so I understand that it would be, there's a distinction between old and young in your mind, perhaps, but think about the people that I just referred to in that email.
Mhm.
They are in senior living, so I'm guessing they're age 50 and up. They are
Yeah.
not young, and yet they are striving to put a to other people who who might want to come live there, who are different from them in their reduced physical or cognitive capacity.
Mhm.
I know you've heard about senior living facilities where people don't want walkers,
Mhm.
cluttering up the dining room, or
Yeah.
wheelchairs
Yeah.
in the lobby. And when you do that, you create I mean, it's icky, because you're looking down on people who are physically or cognitively disabled,
Yeah.
but also that could be future you. It could be you tomorrow when you break your foot, right? When you're 20.
Yeah.
It could be you, it could be your best friend. Suppose your friend needs to use a wheelchair, before you do. Or do you then stop being their friend
Mhm.
because associating with them makes you seem less, groovy or mobile? I mean, it's a really ugly division that just increases stigma and your own fear that one day that might happen to you, and then you will be othered. Whether that's consciously or articulated or not, it brings out the worst in human nature.
Mhm. I think everything that you're touching on is it attaches to one of my kind of self-criticisms of our industry, which is that we are not trying to create solutions for ourselves, our families, our future selves. We're creating solutions based on a kind of deficiency model of aging. We're trying to provide solutions to things that we perceive as problems, aka aging. But like for example, our company Bella Groves, and the fact that we internally describe ourselves as an education company, not a care company. Care is a way that care is one of the ways that our education is used, but our model is similar, more akin to higher learning in universities than it is to traditional assisted living, senior living.
Nice. Yeah, it reminds me of the shift from caregiver to care partner
Mhm.
as language, because I think arguably, not to bring it around to my book again, but the most important chapter in the book is called the independence trap.
Mm.
This notion that we are ever independent, or that giving and receiving care of any sort is a one-way transaction,
Yeah.
in which the receiver gets all the value and is indebted to the other person who's simply a saint. If I mean, it's a hokey trick, but I've seen it back in the olden days when we used to gather in big rooms to hear what people had to say. Someone said, who likes to help people? And every hand shoots up. And who likes to receive help? And everyone is hiding under their chairs because of the stigma related to ability. That's not age, that's ability, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we all need help lifelong. If you're 18, and my son is 35 now, he broke his ankle in 3 places. He needed a lot of help. It so happened that at the same time I had my shoulder replaced. I was in a sling. It was, we were all encountering new levels of disability. Some of it is permanent, some of it is temporary. We move in and out. We move in and out of ability privilege, age privilege, even race and gender privilege, can fluctuate. All these are different components of being human with different effects and importance at different stages of our lives. But we all need help in understanding these things, in coping with the hard stuff, and in delighting in the fun stuff together, lifelong.
Wow. It seems like part of our journey to overcome and correct this path that we've been on is almost to, well, not almost, but it is exactly to decouple this idea that aging and ability are just tied together, that it's as you grow or as you grow older, that your ability just it's an inverse relationship, right? Or
it's not
supposedly.
Inverse, it's unpredictable. My guess, knowing nothing about graphs or math, is that it would be a scatter plot.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. Because a crucial, sometimes I think if there's like one fact about aging that I could blast into every skull in the universe, it would be that the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. When we are young, 8-year-olds, every 8-year-old is unique, but of course there's very, limited development. They're physically, cognitively, socially, developmentally pretty homogenous compared to 18-year-olds who are way more alike than 28-year-olds, and so on out. So in terms of abilities or interests or anything else, clearly you're going to share more with your age group when you are young. Unfortunately, we live in such an age segregated society that we tend to be largely surrounded by people our own age all the way out, which I think fosters the understandable belief, but it is a delusion, that the most important thing we have in common is age, when it's not. It's that we like music or hate music or want to hike or can't hike or whatever it may be. So that and whether or not you like to hike or can hike is going to become more variable with age. You might not be able to hike, but really like some walking or whatever it is. You may be a couch potato, but if you're a couch potato, you're probably a couch potato at 20, right? So age sort of paradoxically, I want a world in which we acknowledge age without shame, just as an important part of our identity, but in which its importance retreats as a principle that has anything to do with what we want to do or be or think about in the world.
Wow. It poses to me almost a kind of professionally existential question, which is, if you have chosen a pursuit like in aging services, how do you do that? How do you acknowledge age without, adding all of the implicit bias in it? And in particular, in senior living, assisted living, where people generally just accept that this profession is about helping seniors who can't do things for themselves. The question maybe some listeners, and truthfully I have in my own head, is how do we do that? How do we combat ageism while being in a very specific field like assisted living, where the premise of it is supporting somebody that requires that assistance? How do we do that? How do we begin to address it?
I'm smiling because because you're already doing it.
Mm.
And everyone who listens to you and pays attention to what you say is already embarked on the task simply by asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that doesn't sound facile. I know it's true. I can tell you that the more I learn about aging, physically, socially, the way it's constructed, the way it's looked at by different individuals that I meet in different cultures, the more interesting it gets. Your answer to that question is going to be different from your colleague down the hall,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be different now than it will be in 10 years. And the way in which it's different is going to depend on your personal experience, on what you had for breakfast, on your own, gender and social and economic situation. So there are a million answers. The important thing is to acknowledge that the people that you are working with are your own future selves, and to avoid, a really good rule of thumb is just, people say, well, what do I call old people, or what do I, it's such a minefield out there.
Ask
which
them.
it is. Language is a moving target. Ask them.
Yeah.
Ask people what they want to be called. Do you want to be described as spry or cute?
Nope.
Yeah, my lip is curling for those of you who are not watching. Please don't call me that, because it's icky. I don't want to be, don't use a word or a phrase to, describe an older person or a homosexual person or, whatever. The phrase that can't, a fat person, there are fat people now, which is fantastic. We're like, I'm fat. I'm good with being fat. You can call me fat. There are other people who don't want to do that. And, geezer. There are older people who proudly say, I'm in the geezer club. Fine. But don't call someone a geezer without asking what they'd like to be called.
Yeah.
So the answers are as individual as human beings are. But just by raising this question, which is just eternally interesting, and as the culture gets more mixy-uppy and our culture gets more mixy-uppy and we become, thank heavens, a minority white country in the US, where more and more people have contact, I hope, with people who do not look like them, and maybe don't share their values, that we learn to appreciate and acknowledge the difference while working to find common ground. And of course, aging is the one universal human experience, so it offers a unique lens into that.
Yeah. So many beautiful points there. I think the insight I want to draw from that, I like to try and summarize points as we go along.
Good luck.
Yeah. But I think one of them that kind of rang true for me is actually kind of a leadership philosophy that I subscribe to, which is the value of the question over the value of the answer. That a well-posed question is so much more impactful to the team that you lead than giving them an answer to a supposed solution.
And sitting with uncertainty, it's certainly true working with bias. I am such an impatient person, and I'd rather make the wrong decision today than the right one tomorrow. And just realizing that this work is hard. It's going to take time, and you will never, ever, ever be done. But it gets knowing the discomfort means that you are challenging some way you used to think, and it's never fun to be uncomfortable, but it is comforting to know that the fact that you're uncomfortable means you're doing real work. So that sustains you.
Yeah. Well, it's a great practical takeaway in a otherwise what can feel like a really philosophical conversation at times. A real practical takeaway here for listeners and for myself is, it's okay to struggle with the answer. The important thing is to ask the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sitting with uncertainty. I'm going to have to remember that one for my team as well. Earlier, Ashton, you mentioned kind of this distinction about having more life ahead of you versus behind you. And, you mentioned you're going to turn, is it 70 this year?
Yeah.
Okay. Happy almost birthday.
Thank you.
When is your actual birthday?
End of June.
End of June. Happy almost birthday in June. And which I know, and I always thought this before, it was mentioned in your book, but I always hated when people said, Susan is turning 85 years young, as if that's a compliment. So there's a lot of things that people say.
You made me yelp out loud.
Yeah, that people say meaning for it to be a compliment, but don't realize it's really insulting to do that.
I mean, maybe, that woman takes that as a compliment. So you have not insulted her by calling her young, but, another really good, it's not even a starting point, but sort of a tool or a tactic is to think about how you use the words old and young. When people say I'm 85 years young, they're committing sort of the mother of all ageist sins. That's a really horrible way to put it, which is to equate old with insert good thing, bad thing rather, and young with being attractive, being sexy, being up to date, being competent, you name it, and old with the inverse. When we say, you're young at heart, or he has such a youthful spirit or whatever, what we mean is that person is energetic.
Yeah.
That person is creative. That person is interested in what's around them. Those are not properties that age confers. Those are functions of who we are. And we were probably, have fundamental character traits from the minute the sperm hit the egg. They don't have to do with age.
Yeah.
So if someone looks fantastic, instead of saying you look great for your age, say you look great.
You look great. Yeah.
What is age? Age does not have to have anything to do with it. Although that is my one snappy comeback that I've come up with in all these years is to say you look great for your age too.
Yeah. I'd love that.
And let that uncomfortable silence sit there, because the person meant it as a compliment, but intention does not get you off the hook. It's not irrelevant, but it doesn't mean that what you did was okay.
Ashton, as an inside joke, I really thought about saying that when we got on the podcast. Ashton, you look so great for your age. But
that's before you knew how ancient I am.
but it's true that it's an unnecessary qualifier for a
that's
compliment.
what I mean. Like age is it's there. We need to acknowledge that it's there, but it's not actually relevant. I look good or terrible,
Yeah. It's like saying,
and if the fact that I do look good has way more to do with luck and privilege than it does with my age. No, I'm lucky that I don't have chronic illnesses. I'm really lucky that my children are healthy. I think, anxiety, worry, and, class, I have enough money in the bank. I'm not worried about, what's going to happen if I can't pay my rent. And that, those all have so much more, if I had to pin down the biggest problem with giving age more value than it deserves in shaping our identities or our circumstances, it is because it obscures the far larger role that class plays, along with gender and ethnicity and geography in shaping who we are and how we move through life than age does.
It's so true. I mean, even in the specific work that I'm in dementia education, it's something that how else can you explain the the way in which dementia affect people of different classes, different socioeconomic circles? It's not some weird, inexplicable thing that that Mother Nature has said, well, this is just how it's going to be. Clearly, there are health effects that are associated with privilege and class, and I think being
much
able
higher
to
rates in African American communities, which have to do with culture and also with biology and class.
Yeah.
Because of the way because of this effects of systemic racism in holding so many African Americans back from equal opportunity.
Yeah, it's one of the kind of baked in kind of corrective measures of our business strategy with Bella Groves in founding it in education. Earlier, before we started speaking on the recorded line, I think, or you just kind of mentioned that must be harder to monetize. Actually not really. If we think about what the true problem is, the problem isn't I'm getting older and I'm getting dementia. The problem is I may have dementia and I don't know what to do. So it's going to affect a very, very specific subset of a subset. And the problem isn't I have dementia. The problem is I don't know what to do. And so we're just trying to answer those questions about how do you talk to your doctor about dementia? Is it dementia? And then getting really specific to what is sundowning, what isn't a normal sign of aging. And I think providing that education for people in a very simple to understand way. One of our kind of revenue models around our business is an online learning center where we're going to have a very, very low monthly subscription for people to come on, speak to aging specialists, dementia specialists, and have a shared learning experience around that virtual community. So that, as far as I can tell, is one of the better ways that we can democratize the know-how of dementia that our industry has. We have know-how, but unfortunately, only rich white people can access that know-how in our $5,000 to $10,000 a month dementia community. So what we're trying to do is to distill our value, which is know-how and knowledge, and get it in as cheap of an avenue as possible so that potentially everyone who's affected by it can access that.
That's fantastic. That's terrific. Yeah. And of course, somewhere on the syllabus, I would like to see, and I understand it's a different order of questions and priorities than I might be facing something that's potentially, debilitating and terrifying. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
But is to encourage people also to zoom out
Yeah.
to the forces that shape this as the end of your life, as a reason you need to buy expensive things that don't work, as a reason to segregate people with this diagnosis, and on and on and on. There's a fabulous quote by a professor named Amos Wilson, I believe. If you want to understand any problem in America, don't look at who suffers from it. Look at who profits from it.
Oh, wow.
So when you, in the binder, in the 3-ring binder, have the zoom out. Zoom out section.
I'm so glad I'm recording this because I need to go back and remember all of this. And I think, and that is another very specific and written down part of our company vision, is to help people living with dementia to stay connected in their communities. And I think it's one of the, it is actually probably the greatest problem that people living with dementia face, which is the just pronounced isolation that they feel and that their care partners feel.
Of course.
And that is explicitly a part of our mission, is to help change that.
Well, and in doing that, that policy or solution, except I don't want to frame it as a problem, it intersects with so many aspects of life itself. If when older people live in community, whether they have dementia or not, that in itself undoes ageism, just the way living in a community with people of all different races undoes racism, because it's really hard to hang on to your stereotypes that everyone who looks a certain way is the same when you're mushed up against them and you're confronted all day long with the evidence to the contrary, right?
Yeah.
But I remember one of the many things I was astonished to learn, because I started out knowing nothing 15 years ago. I assumed that the most important component of a good old age was health. It is not. So then I thought, well, it must be wealth because it's America and we can buy our way to, whatever. No, it is having a solid social network. And that is true whether you are a millionaire who can, granted, afford, to pay people to come in and support him in ways that make him appear, to be able-bodied or, have a social network. But we're really talking about friendships and meaningful relationships. And it is often communities with less money that do not have the option to live other than in community that are the most resilient in these ways. So I'm not saying it's great to be poor because everyone lives in one room and you're all, whatever, but there are all sorts of interesting, they're not really paradoxes. They seem paradoxical because we're so brainwashed, but, ways in which age intersects with all these other things. And we know a lot. We know more than we think we do.
Yeah. It's something that I think about with even the word community itself, our industry, the senior care industry, has effectively tried to uh, define the way the word community is used. They when they say community, they mean the physical structure of the senior living place. And so it's one thing that I am very specific about. We don't call the physical place where people live a care communal area a community, because it's not. It's actually the antithesis of community. It's
Well, it depends on how it's used. The building
yeah,
is used, of course, but yeah, I'm with you.
true point.
And
Yeah.
encourage an expansive view
Hmm.
of community, because if you're open to the idea that it can take many forms, then you're not looking for someone your own age and class necessarily to sit next to
Hmm.
you in the dining room. You're looking for a neighborhood group, a choir,
There you go.
a political campaign,
Sure.
someone who likes to garden, who could be, where what you have in common is an interest,
Hmm.
and work from there. And I do think, it's really important to make friends of all ages, because that is how it's how we dismantle ageism organically.
Yeah.
I think it's good for older people to be reminded how hard it is to be young.
Mm.
And I think a lot of younger people would be a lot less afraid of getting old if they saw how many of us olders really find being the age we are to be a source of enormous confidence and power.
Yeah. I would
I mean, no
agree.
one wants to be any younger.
No one wants to be any younger.
I mean, what did I just, I mean, I think a few do, but most of us, even, people's eyes light up when I pose it as a rhetorical question, but I say, no, you don't get to just like swap out the battered bits. You have to wipe the slate clean. And a
Yeah.
few people say, yeah, but most people know, of course, that our years are what make us us.
Yeah.
And unless they really have had, I think,
Hmm.
terribly unhappy lives, or think that they committed some foundational error in their youth, which I think I would say is a delusion, because I mean, it's their lives. I don't mean to say like the way they understand their lives is wrong, but we learn from mistakes. And if you marry the wrong person, or pick
Hmm.
the wrong career, life is long if we're lucky, and we have so many opportunities to learn. We learn much more from mistakes and embarrassments than we do from successes and things that come easy. So but the point is that there are real losses that have to do with aging, but only two are inevitable. Some part of our bodies are going to fall apart, which sucks.
Hmm.
And people we've known all our lives are going to die. And that too is a terrible loss. But accompanying that are all these processes of accumulation and addition.
Hmm.
And it is also a process of enrichment. Let's tell both sides of the story, and not just the one about decline and loss, which persists because fear is profitable, and fear and anxiety are much more likely to get clicks on the website or subscribers to your magic potion than
Yeah.
the true story, which is you're probably going to muddle along in the messy middle, just like most of the people in the messy middle, by definition, slowed, with missing some of the
Mm.
things that you could do or had when you were young, but also enjoying a whole lot of things that you couldn't do when you were young, or that you do better now, or just adapting and enjoying the long view.
Yeah. It's I think you, I don't know if it was in the book or where you've posed this before, but that idea of, would you choose to be a younger version of yourself, but everything had to be wiped clean? It's almost like if you asked me, hey, I'll give you a new phone, a new device that's just awesome, but none of the photos, none of the contacts, none of it's going to transfer over. You'll never get it back again. I think the vast majority of people would say, no, I need the
Yeah,
memories.
almost everyone says that's all great. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
And realize, yeah, it's why I chose as the epigraph for my book a quote by Anne Lamott. And again, I have seen versions of this idea
Hmm.
from other people, from poets, that we contain all the ages we have ever been.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is
Mm.
beautiful.
I hope this is the start of our friendship, Ashton. and that's why I ask people onto my podcast so that they feel emotionally vested in me, and I in
Uh-oh,
them.
it's working.
It's
Damn it.
working. Good. Yes. Well, truth be told, you occupied my headspace apparently for years before this conversation. So now I'm just going to repay the favor the other way.
You're going to haunt me. All right. Fair's
Yes.
fair. At least I'm
Well,
warned.
and the truth is this is one of the books I'm going to have to reread. There's a couple of books that kind of make it on my list of, okay, don't just read it and put it on the bookshelf. Read it, come back to it. And this
Thank
does
you.
feel like one of those. It was an
No
enjoyable
bigger
read.
compliment.
Well, I do mean it. And I'm glad I got to read it on vacation. Honestly, I know we kind of quipped back and forth about it maybe not being appropriate vacation reading, but I couldn't think of a better vacation read when, the point of a vacation read for me is to be unplugged and to give full attention to just being in the moment, being in, the enjoyment of my company with my wife, being in a beautiful place, and then also giving full intention to the content that I'm receiving. And I'm grateful that I read it on vacation and not in between, emails and work assignments. So there's my plug and a half for the book. This Chair
Thank you so
Rocks, a
much.
manifesto against ageism. And if you're going to be a reader of this book, if you can, take it on vacation with you. You'll be glad that you did.
That is the best plug ever. People should know that my website, thischairrocks.com, has a ton of information, including this blog, where I have been thinking out loud and increasingly about the intersection of ageism with ableism, with racism, all this stuff, if that's your jam. And it's searchable by topic. And also I'm pretty active on social media, at This Chair Rocks on Twitter in particular, and Instagram. I have a This Chair Rocks Facebook page where I, do post almost exclusively about ageism, but I'm careful. I only post meaty stuff. And I also have a LinkedIn page, blah, blah, blah.
It's I know we're wrapping up our conversation here, but I just have to say that the title itself, This Chair Rocks, I think this is something that I'm going to have to think through with the bottle of scotch. But it's so brilliant and it has so many depths to it. It's kind of it's I don't know how, it's just one of those
for
things.
Translators, let me tell you, because it's not even a metaphor in English, of course. I just got, if any of your readers or listeners know anyone who wants to translate the book into Spanish or French or German, none of the big publishers have bitten yet, but more and more translations, and the latest is Turkish. But they sent me a proof of the jacket, and I ran it past a Turkish friend, and she's like, the title of the book is now Rocking Chair. And I'm like,
chair.
No. Well, lose the chair bit entirely and just call it a manifesto if you want, but you cannot call this book Rocking Chair. It's not a book about chairs.
It's so brilliant. It's calling out something that should be called out, and it's adding depths of kind of pride in aging, but also calling out ageism. It's a really
even the pride thing is double-edged. I used to end talks with a slide that says age proud, and now I'm not so fond of that, because I don't think age deserves that much either. It irritates me when someone says, and there's Gladys Jones, she's 98 and everyone applauds. I don't think like breathing till you're 98 is in itself an achievement.
I agree.
I don't want to give it more weight or less weight. Likewise, I don't think, what we want is a world that is way better to be old in, but also a good world in which to be young. The US is not family friendly. There's children's education and nutrition is not funded because we don't value younger people either, because they don't have money and they don't vote. Hello, capitalism.
Yeah,
but I digress.
No, it's lead in for another episode.
That'll be a whole nother tear, but I'll save that for you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that our society certainly has a kind of a a bell curve of, value, and I have
I
air
mean, people
quotes
say,
around
isn't
that.
it better somewhere else, sort of inevitably looking sort of wistfully eastward.
Mm-hmm.
But societies where older people have more power are societies that are not great to be young in. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not what we want either. We want to support, the goal is equity across the lifespan. When you have little kids, and we're just not, I love my children, but I happen to think that that are prioritizing childbearing is heteronormative and also a
Mm-hmm.
function of capitalism. So not to say you have to have biological kids to have have a meaningful life by any means. But we have this idea of going through life, and when you have little kids, you need more help than you ever do going out the other end, or you might need it when you're young and have an accident, or get sick. These things, of course, the incidents, you need help with more things as you get older, because you cease to be as physically strong. That's a minimum. But those interactions with people, I mean, asking for help, that's back to chapter 11, the idea of listening. I wish the adjective independent and active would be stripped out of senior living entirely.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I keep trying to wrap up, but then I'm given another thing that I have to talk about, which is this concept that the evolution of terminology in senior living went from nursing home, wait, that's bad, let's call it something else, to skilled nursing, which isn't that much better, and then assisted living, wait, people don't want to be assisted, independent living, that's better, not. And then active aging, it just, it's getting
the
further.
reason it's all so complicated, I mean, it's complicated because it's complicated.
It is complicated.
But also all these words people don't want to associate with old, with needing assistance. So that's why, and I will wrap up with this, that is why I do the work I do, and why I am grateful for your allyship, is that if we don't challenge this at the fundamental culture change level, the way the women's movement challenged our notions of what women were capable of and the access to opportunity and voice that we deserved everywhere in the world, we are not going to change this. Well, insert the blank living is going to remain icky and othering until we address the stigma of aging, the stigma of disability, from the lens that we are all in this together, and that those are universal human experiences with the opportunity to join us together and help, and in so doing, in being joined, come together in combating all these forms of prejudice. Because what was I was just reading at Martin Luther King quote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yeah.
Or all these ideas, they're expressed in different ways by brilliant people. It's the same idea. We're all in this together. Being anti-ageist means supporting every struggle for equal rights.
I think that's a beautiful summary and a call to action to further this conversation wherever we are. And lots of takeaways here. And I'll probably have to actually write a blog post associated with this to try and distill it into the meaningful points for me. But I think that's a great call to action, is to ask the question. It's okay to sit in the uncertainty of the answer that this question will pose, but the question is, how do we address, how do we confront, how do we accept that we likely have ageist operating systems behind our, or in between our ears, but asking that question helps us to at least address it. And I'm so grateful, Ashton, that we've had a chance to have this conversation. If you have a minute, I'd love for you to stick around after I do the outro here. But so many important things here. I just have to end on a plug one more time for the book, because it is.
I did not pay him, ladies and gentlemen.
You did not. That's right. And in fact, I have no sponsored content of any kind, which is really great.
We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah. This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism by Ashton Applewhite, author, activist. I'm curious what the normal day of an activist is. We'll talk to you about that offline. But thank you so much for being here. And I hope you'll come back actually and advance this conversation with me and my listeners as we continue this fight.
That would be great. And thank you for the important work that you and all your listeners do.
Thank you, Ashton. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Level Up Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and its YouTube channel. Better yet, share it with someone you know who is on their own leadership development journey. I hope you'll be back for the next episode of Level Up. But until then, I hope that you are leading well, and remember that you are living your legacy today. So, make it a good one.